Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner. If you like the show, please rate and review it on the platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, particularly on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find us and grow the show. And of course, you can learn more about Flute New Music Consortium at flutenewmusicconsortium.com. Brandon Nelson is an American composer who invites listeners to explore the esoteric, the ephemeral, and other curios of existence from which he finds fertile creative ground. Embracing a wide palette of styles and methods, he is equally at home writing for students as for professionals. A prolific composer who is much sought after for commissions, his compositions have been performed widely throughout the US, Canada, Australia, Asia, and Europe. He holds music degrees from Northern Michigan University and from Central Michigan University, where he studied composition under David Gillingham and the late Jose Luis Marturia. In addition to his numerous contributions to the chamber repertoire, he has composed widely for concert band, choir, and orchestra. He resides in Ishpeming, Michigan with his ever-patient wife and colony of 5 cats. He has 3 teenage kids and more books than seem appropriate. Brandon Nelson, thanks so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Can you tell us about Ishpeming, Michigan?
It's about as far away from anything as you can be in the lower 48 states. It's a fairly small town. Mining's a big industry here. The schools are pretty good. I graduated from the schools here before heading off to college. I mean, it's usually just pretty quiet for the most part. It's got its high points. Of course, as a composer, I can live anywhere. Can live in the middle of the woods and still do what I do, as long as I have an internet connection. Of course, I went to Northern Michigan University, which is in Marquette. That's where I really cut my teeth as a composer and decided to go to grad school. The band director there was pretty generous in letting me write for the symphonic band and playing my stuff. And you don't always get that in college, so that was a really pretty good privilege. I think that helped get me into grad school, having that experience. Of course, your hometown forms who you are before you get to college. Obviously, I got a good education. I guess in sum, I can't really complain about living in Ishpeming.
Yeah, so it's interesting, because I think longtime listeners know that I like to go down this road with people. But it sounds like actually having grown up in a smaller place really allowed you to develop your chops in a lot of ways that you might not have been able to if there had been.
Yeah, there is that advantage of being a bigger fish in a tiny pond. People just kind of blew their minds that I wrote music when I was a kid, and I don't think that would have been as big a deal in like Manhattan or Chicago, where you got all kinds of little kids running around and prodigies, and so yeah, I think in that sense, being kind of cushioned from the outside world, it obviously there's downsides to that. You don't get to interact with a lot of other artists. You don't get the same kind of feedback or opportunities, but you also get to develop kind of your own voice and a good deal of confidence that you might not otherwise get, comparing yourself to people who are just so naturally gifted that there's just no way you can compete. I think it did give me some time to develop at my own pace, and I didn't feel quite the same level of pressure.
I noticed on your webpage that you mentioned that you've been working on teaching yourself to play all the recorders of the consort, the 4 primary ones. This is interesting to me as a flute player because I have come back to recorder a couple of times in my life, which is always so trippy for me. In a positive way. So how's the recorder playing going? Do you have any advice for those of us who are spending less time with it?
It's satisfying in the sense that I actually get to play something, because I kind of gave up horn playing after my undergraduate degree. I never really considered myself much of a performer. I was just doing it because I had to get the degree. But my first degree was in music education, so naturally you have to learn how to play something. Really kind of a performance degree with some teaching classes. I did just well enough to pass my juries. I think they just let me go. They, okay, fine. We know you want to be a composer and a conductor, and so you can go do those things and just sell your horn. And it's the same thing with the recorder too. The general public tends to think of the recorder as being like a toy or an elementary school instrument that you just kind of make obnoxious sounds on. But of course, being a professional musician, understand the repertoire and the history behind the instrument, and yeah, I'm not quite to the point where I'm ready to buy high-end wooden recorders from Germany. I actually find the bass recorder to be the hardest one to play. Just with the breath control, it's very touchy. It's very easy to overblow on a bass recorder. And it does speak a little bit slowly, as you might expect. Fingers are just so far apart. And I've always just kind of wanted to play chamber ensemble music. Even when I was playing the horn, I did enjoy playing in brass quintets. That was a lot of fun. So I figured, well, I could just start my own recorder consort and just overdub myself playing. So that's kind of the thing. So I wanted to write for the recorder consort, but that was kind of the ideas. So it had a composition component to it in addition to a performance component. How might I use this down the road?
That sounds rewarding, though.
Could you tell us a little bit about your collaboration with Triage Woodwinds?
I knew Triage before Triage existed. I met Eileen and Amy on Twitter. I don't even know how long ago. I kind of got to know them and what they do and what they had, what were at the time what they were doing, performing up there in New England in various schools and ensembles. I think one of the first interactions I had with Eileen was with her flute choir she was with at the time, and I said, "Well, I've never written for flute choir before." She said, "Well, would you want to?" So that was my first collaboration, but that was Triage, of course. That they wouldn't exist until much later. Then, I met Amy. Of course, Amy, it turns out, knows Eileen, so I wrote duets for them to play, and then. And gradually expanded to, well, we know this guy who plays the clarinet, and so would you be interested in writing trios? And eventually this became Triage.
Well, I understand we're going to meet you and hear a little from Triage at our new music festival in October. What other projects are you guys cooking up right now?
Let's see, I wrote a piece for Eileen, a group that she has for alto flutes. It was kind of an unusual commission, write a trio for alto flutes. It's like I seldom even ever write for alto flute, period. That is probably the more recent project, but I have written some things for Triage that will be featured. I'm not writing anything currently. There's always things that were percolating and bouncing around, and maybe this will happen, maybe that'll happen. We'll see. Everybody's very busy, and if it happens, it happens. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's part of what my presentation might be about, is being flexible. Sometimes collaborations work as planned, and sometimes you have to punt. So then you have to find something, an alternate arrangement, a new forum to present a work that's already been paid for, and so that doesn't go to waste. There's a lot of angles to discuss when it comes to collaborating with any ensemble, which very much including Triage. Working with working professional musicians is a challenge because there is a lot of demand for their time. Working with people's schedules is probably one of the hardest things. I mean, writing the music is the easy part. That's the fun part. And then I get to pop in on Zoom rehearsals every now and then and tell them what I didn't think worked, which doesn't happen very often because I think in Triage, I kind of get what they can do pretty well. I can just give them the music and they can play it. Of course, not all composer ensemble collaborations work out so felicitously, especially in now this day and age. You don't always meet people in person, like not even me. I live in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan itself is fairly isolated, and I live right in the middle of it. So I don't get to see a lot of professional musicians and interact with them. So I would not have a career without the internet. If it doesn't work on the internet, then it just doesn't work. I've had to learn how to do that over things like Zoom. You have to be adaptable and flexible and understanding that you might not always get your way. You might not always be ideal. Sometimes, even with a large ensemble like a concert band, you hear rehearsals over less than ideal audio through somebody's cell phone and something like, I guess you played it right. So that can be difficult. I think I consider myself fortunate in the respect of collaboration because I don't know that I've really had very many negative collaborations or just relationships that didn't work out or I got ghosted, as they say, or sometimes you have to rewrite things if you don't know the person super well. Part of the process of collaboration then is taking some time to listen, do more listening than talking, and listen to what they want and try to figure out how that gels with what you do. You got to also kind of check your ambition and not be desperate to take just everything that comes across your door either. It's not always coming down to creativity. It's sometimes just practical matters like that too. You got to figure out, well, I might like this piece of music, but will this play in Peoria?
Speaking of your type of music, I don't know if you know this, but I am going to get to play one of your pieces with our mutual friend Eileen, also at
I think she
the
mentioned
Music
that
Festival.
yeah.
So what drew me in was a chance to work with Eileen, but also it's a piece about cheese. Can you
Yes, it
tell us
is.
a little bit about this piece about cheese, please?
I thought it was a very important project. It hadn't been done as far as I know. And who doesn't like cheese? Well, I suppose if you're lactose intolerant, you don't like cheese. But I thought it was interesting because cheese is more than just about food. What is food about? Well, food is about culture. People make specific kinds of food for specific reasons, and they use it for specific reasons sometimes in specific contexts. As I learned as I was researching the piece, I decided that, not only would this be an interesting angle, certainly it's eye-catching and provocative in some sense. But yeah, so the cheese piece ended up being not just a bit of silliness. It also does have importance in the sense of being a vehicle for cultural exchange and awareness of what's going on in other parts of the world and their history and their stories from not just the very important people, but the common people, because those are the people who are usually making the cheese. So you get to do kind of a deeper dive into learning about the social aspects of other people's. And there was also a bit of ethnomusicology involved in researching some of the types of cheese. Like one of the movements is Nepal. They don't make a lot of cheese in that part of the world because they don't have a lot of dairy cows, and a lot of folks there are lactose intolerant. So I had to do quite a bit of research on folk music from from that part of the world, and it's harder to find than you might think. It did take a while to put that movement together, but I'm certainly glad that I took the time to do it. I didn't even know there was such thing as moose cheese. It must take an awful lot of bravery to cultivate it. I don't think the moose appreciate any kind of human contact, especially so intimate. Milking a moose, I can't imagine that. So it takes a special kind of person to say, well, I'd like to try that. Hold my beer. I'm gonna try to milk this moose over here, and we're gonna see what happens. I've never actually tried moose cheese because it's very, very expensive. It has to be imported, obviously. But maybe someday. And I had some fun with that movement too. And then Swedish folk music is easier to find. Doing it creatively, though, I had some fun with that. I think you get to do some stomping around and acting like mooses. That's kind of the story of the cheese piece. Is an interesting opportunity for me too, because I wanted to also get to experiment with wide collaboration on that piece. Not so much in the sense that I had an ensemble in mind for this. It started life as a piccolo quartet, and It's been arranged for various other kinds of ensembles since then, but I still prefer it be performed by piccolos if possible. I just don't know a lot of people who have piccolo quartets, or if there are a lot of them in existence even. So there's some novelty aspects to that piece. It's novel in the sense of the instrumentation, and it's novel in the sense of the subject matter. And I wanted to involve the wider community of musicians that I know. I think I wrote this piece in 2015 or 2016. I was on Twitter and Instagram, I think mostly, asking people, well, what kind of cheese do you think I should write about next? And I would have polls, and I would get people involved, and we'd have discussions and debates about which is better, which is more interesting. And yeah, that I even had someone point out that I had misidentified the nationality of a particular cheese, and I had to completely redo a movement because it turned out it was Swiss, not French. So, well, it would offend the French terribly, and you can't offend the French. It's just you don't do that. So, especially when it comes to cheese or wine, And I had written about wine too. I wrote a piece on commission for contralto flute, solo unaccompanied for wine that goes through various types of wine. So I guess you could pair it with the cheese piece if you wanted.
Well, so
Double it.
we'll get the cheese piece at the New Music Festival, right? Is that what
I think that's
That
what
is
I'm
what you're hearing.
understanding.
Cool. Well, that's exciting. I look
Right.
forward to learning about the oral qualities of moose cheese.
Well, there you go.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you in Omaha.
No, I haven't really toured Omaha to any extent, so I look forward to seeing it. I do look forward to meeting flute nerds. Who knows what'll happen? I don't know.
Yeah, and others too. I mean, there's a nice collection of not flute players.
Yeah, so I look forward to meeting people and seeing Omaha and getting out of Dodge for a while.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you're coming.
Yeah, I'm glad to be I'm glad to have been invited. And
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.